I just love it how the computer slows down as soon as you're getting ready to do something meaningful. Hang on a second here. Just lovely. Just lovely. All right. I know we're live, guys. I'm just getting stuff prepared, so I'll give you a few seconds. Give me a few seconds to get some stuff pulled up here. Go ahead and announce yourselves as you join in, and then I will push the button. Okay, we got that. We got this. Hey, Carlos. Yes, yeah, exactly. Everybody can warm up just like class. We got a lot to talk about today. I might take more than 30 minutes on this, but we'll see. All right. Okay, just one more second. All right, and we're live. Hello everyone, this is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, here for another I Love Jeet Kune Do broadcast. This is broadcast number 15, and this is the one about two Bruce Lee sayings, my followers in Jeet Kune Do and Man the Living Creature. We're going to talk about that if we have time, and if I can find them, I'll also do one Jeet Kune Do thing. Hey, Sifu Nick, how are you? We'll do one Jeet Kune Do thing that I like and a Jeet Kune Do thing that I hate. All right, so make sure I got my reference materials here. All right, so reference materials for today's broadcasts are, more often than not, Dan Inosanto's Jeet Kune Do book. Whoops, sorry about that. More often than not, Junfan Jeet Kune Do textbook by Chris Kent and Tim Tackett, and then also a little bit from the Filipino martial arts book by Sifu Inosanto. Whoops. Okay, so this is, if you saw the photograph that I used to promote today's broadcast, let me see if I can find them here in the book, because I didn't have time to mark them. All right, so this is the first one. I've shown you this before, right here in Sifu Dan's book, in the corner there. And it says, my followers in Jeet Kune do listen to this. All fixed set patterns are incapable of adaptability or pliability. The truth is outside of all fixed patterns. And then the second quote, which I cannot find, I cannot put my hands on it in this book, but it is the one that says, man, the living creature, the created individual, is always more important than any established style or system. The first one is dated 1966, and as I've told you guys before, this is the reason why, contrary to what is said out there that Jeet Kune Do was conceived of or named or whatever in 67, I disagree with that, just because of the evidence that shows 1966 on the date. So this first Bruce Lee saying, my followers in Jeet Kune do listen to this. All fixed set patterns are incapable of adaptability or pliability. The truth is outside of all fixed patterns. So I believe that this sign first hung at the school in Chinatown. Right, although I'm thinking if it's 66, that, let's see if I have my, probably the first place that it hung was 66, was Chinatown, Los Angeles. I'll have to check on that. And then later on, it hung at the Kali Academy. All right, so because of its date in 66, I sometimes wonder if what it's trying to convey has, and it was influenced by the fight with Wang Jackman, which took place, as you know, in December of 1964. Because there have been reports that, Cedro Bruce determined in his post-fight analysis, as I call it, that sticking to Wing Chun type techniques is what prolonged the fight. It took, he thought it should have been over in a few seconds, and instead it took like a few minutes. Oh, I forgot to do something for my friend. Here's the shot of today's Bruce Lee t-shirt. This is the one I call, I Can See You Coming From Way Off, right? So, if we start at the beginning, we go back to Bruce Lee's roots, right? Then we discover that he would have had to have learned a bunch of set patterns, because if he was in Wing Chun, he must have started with Sunum Tao. I don't know if he learned Chum Kyu and Bu Ji as a Wing Chun student in Hong Kong, since he was, I think he was in Wing Chun there for what, 3-5 years, right? So I'm not sure if you get to Chum Kyu and Bu Ji within 5 years. But it's also reported that Bruce Lee knew forms from other Kung Fu systems, right? So Dan Inosanto talks about him knowing, having a kicking set from Tam Toi, right? And Tam Toi is a thing that I think there's at least two methods or two versions of Tam Toi. There's a Chin Wu version, and then there's a Walum version of Tam Toi. It's known as springing leg, and I think it also has something to do with like Northern Shaolin praying mantis, right? So anybody who's into the Kung Fu movies knows that in the Kung Fu movies there's a thing called Northern legs and Southern fists, right? That indicates so that the people in the North did more kicking or so than the people in the South, right? I also believe that Bruce Lee is referring perhaps to the fixed patterns of like the forms in Kung Fu systems and the kata in karate systems, right? So if we put this in historical context, we might have to ask ourselves then, how were these things being used or applied back in the 1960s when Bruce Lee infamously said this, right? Compared to other Kung Fu systems, Wing Chun is kind of radical in that it has those three forms that I talked about, right? And those three forms in and of themselves are not flamboyant like a lot of the other systems like Choi Le Foot or Hung Ga, since there's not a lot of moving around and a lot of stance changing, right? Sunum Tao, Chum Kyu, and Bu Ji tend to stay essentially in one spot. For moving around in a set pattern in Wing Chun, maybe we could look at the 108 or the 116, because there are 8 secret moves, right? In the wooden dummy form. And another set pattern we could say that exists in the Wing Chun would be the Chi Sao, whether it's the Dan Chi, the single-handed Chi Sao, or Song Chi, the two-handed Chi Sao, right? Hung Ga, by contrast and comparison, has at least 9 forms, and Choi Le Foot probably takes the cake in Chinese Kung Fu, because they have at least 20 empty hand forms, and then when it comes to then there's like 10 two-person fighting forms, and then there's like a slew of weapons forms, right? Probably like in excess of 50 weapons forms or something. Karate systems like Goju-Ryu has 12 forms in it, and Shotokan has I used to know this by heart. 26. I think Shotokan has 26 kata, right? So the question then is, have all these people who have been training in these systems for so long, have they been indulging in exercises in futility all this time? Or might Bruce Lee have been a little bit hasty in his apparent condemnation of set patterns, right? Because we ask the question, what is the purpose of all these set patterns in the first place? So if you ask the practitioners of set patterns, they'll tell you stuff like well, this is the catalog of techniques for the style or for the system, right? The set patterns provide exercise or development for things like endurance and flexibility and mobility and agility, actual proficiency in the techniques, right? Which are all good things and are all the requisite attributes for martial art proficiency, right? So again, I ask the question, what did Bruce Lee mean then by them being incapable of pliability or adaptability? So let me check this out. The dictionary definition of pliability is the quality of being easily bent, right? SKA, which stands for sometimes known as flexibility. The definition of adaptability is the quality of being able to adjust to new conditions, the capacity to be modified for a new use or a new purpose. So I think then that, again, because we're talking historical context, Bruce Lee was perhaps complaining that in traditional martial arts, these patterns had to be performed in an exact manner every time, and that real combat would never follow a particular script every time, right? Real combat would be different every time. And so he deemed that set patterns are unnecessary or useless, as in reject what is useless, if you thought that you could use them for anything other than exercise, like we talked about, right? I remember in my own practice as a kid, I can remember it being suggested to us in Wushu Quan that we try to use the techniques from the forms in our sparring. Never worked for me, right? And I also remember that after Way of the Dragon, so the fight scene with Bruce Lee and Bob Wall, where he kicks his lead hand twice, right, with the front kick, and then he feints the front kick and he hook kicks him in the head. That particular combination became like a favorite for a bunch of us sparring in our karate school. But that sequence, that sequence of two hits, fake front kick, hit hook kick, that does not appear anywhere in the kata that we were practicing, right? So that is that's an example of the disconnect between what you might practice in your basics and what you're applying in your sparring. And I think that that's what it comes down to. Bruce Lee didn't see how the set patterns could be bent or used under different conditions if you had to perform them the same way every time. So now then the question becomes, well, what do you do if you've got a whole lot of techniques to practice, right? So maybe you cut down on the number of techniques and instead focus on the few that can be pulled off at a high percentage rate of success. That would be an example of the daily decrease, right? The whole hacking away at the unessentials thing. Or, for example, right, I just saw this. Sifu Dan often mentions that in judo there's 67 throws, but that professional competitors use like 3 or 5 throws, right? So that's evidence for the fact that in fighting you don't need a whole variety of techniques, but you do need to have trained your techniques under fighting conditions. And in fact, I've heard that was one of the things that Bruce Lee liked most about judo, is that you had to go in there and perform the throw, right? Compared to the no contact karate of that era, of the 1960s, right? In karate basics, you would stop your punch or your kick, like half an inch from the target or what have you, right? And we were told that this helps you on your kime, your focus. But I can see how somebody like Bruce Lee might find that to be a waste of time, right? So to get back to what it is that you have to train, maybe Bruce Lee found an answer then in shadow boxing, in taking an approach more like the Western boxers, right? Free form practice of techniques in no set pattern. But I think that even in shadow boxing, you might run into trouble because I know when I do, I saw Sifu Nick, I think it was yesterday, doing Carenza, right? I know that sometimes when I do Carenza, there are certain patterns that I repeat. When you shadow box, if cross hook uppercut is one of your favorite combinations, then when you shadow box, you're probably going to include cross hook uppercut. When you do your focus mitt work, you're probably going to include cross hook uppercut. When you work on the heavy bag, right? When you work on the top and bottom bag, you're probably going to do cross hook uppercut, right? And it's because it's your high percentage technique, right? It's one of your go-to techniques. Same thing for your kickboxing combinations, right? And even in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee does advise that you need to develop your own favorite set or your own set of favorite combinations, right? But there's no denying that shadow boxing will help to keep your mind pliable. So how to train and what to train. This is where the next Bruce Lee saying comes in. Man, the living creature, the created individual, is always more important than any established style or system. For me, as a Dan Inosanto student, I think that it is in the application of this, let's call it guideline. This is one of the places where Dan Inosanto's genius shows up. Right? Many of you will know that when Cesar Bruce told Sifu Dan to take the most dedicated, close the Chinatown school and take the most dedicated people to his backyard and train them there, that this is where, he also said to him, however you want to bring out the art is fine with me. So my understanding is that one of the things that Sifu Dan implemented then was more of the Panantukan, the Filipino boxing type drilling, what I would call glove drills, as opposed to the hard sparring that Bruce Lee engaged in. That's my understanding, right? Now, I could be wrong. I wasn't there, right? So, this is something that we can investigate, right? But see, hard, realistic drilling can develop all of the attributes that we were talking about, right? But when we're talking about what the attributes that you can get from the practice of forms, right? It's just that now your movement is very closely related to your fighting. And even what you're shadow boxing, right, is matched to what you're using in your glove drills. So there's no disconnect. There's no separation between what you're drilling, whether it's a glove drill with a training partner, or what you're drilling on the focus mitts, or what you're drilling on your heavy bag, right? I'm getting a message here from Carlos, right? Okay, so here's the thing, Carlos. I can't see on my camera when people are checking in. There must be a button or something that I didn't push. So, but Carlos asked me, when you guys come online, if you could just give a shout out as to where you're, I almost said calling in from, where you're logging in from or joining from, right? The last one I saw was Richard, don't let me assassinate your name, Richard. Richard Savara from Albany, New York. I know Sifu Nick is there, once from Illinois, now from Texas, right? But yeah, so okay, I'll try to keep an eye on that, Mr. Redlick. All right, so now you took me off on a tangent. What the heck was I talking about? No disconnect between what you drill, regardless of how you drill it, whether it's glove drill with a sparring partner, focus mitt drill, heavy bag drill, shadow boxing, or what have you, right? So the danger would be, there's the danger of falling into the same trap of using a fixed set pattern. But if you really get Jeet Kune Do, that's not going to be a problem at all, because this is where you make use of the training guideline that is known as learn the technique. This is how it was first introduced to me. Learn the technique, put it into the flow, add the counter, add the recounter, right? I'm going to teach you that again. Learn the technique, put it into the flow, add the counter, add the recounter. So what the heck is the flow, right? In psychology, there's actually a book called either The Flow or Flow, and don't ask me to give you the name of the guy. It's a European guy with a name that I can never pronounce, right? But you guys can look it up. In psychology, flow is referred to as a state of hyperfocus, a mental state in which one is completely immersed and engaged in an activity, fully focused, energized, and enjoying the activity. So flow drills, you'll remember last week we talked about flow drills being phase 3 stage training. Flow drills are what were described to me 30-something years ago as energy generators, right? I guess the term for civilians might be more like back and forth drills or maybe even exchange drills, right? So if we go back to Wing Chun, then Chi Sao, again, whether Dan Chi or Song Chi, right, are generators because after you've learned the fixed pattern of rotation, right? So, you know, the Tan Sao to the Jig Jern, right? Or if you're on the other end, the Jut Sao to the Bong Sao, right? Or maybe even in the Hubud, you know, where you might go inside, under, trap, and hit, right? Those are energy generators because of the back and forth motion. The important thing about those two is that you have to break the pattern in order to apply the technique out of the flow, right? So a really popular flow drill is, in the Filipino Kali, is the Sombrada, right? Or what some people call sometimes, I think some people call it Decadena, right? I think. Sombrada is a perfect example of the back and forth drill, right? Because one person starts off with the attack, the other person blocks or defends and then counters, and then that counter is counter, and that's why the drill is called counter for counter sometimes in English. But a lot of times on the YouTube, for example, you will see people and all they're doing is the pattern. There's not a change in tempo, a change in elevation, a change in angle, or right? So what has happened is that the Sombrada has become a fixed pattern, right? Whether you're doing the 3-count version or the 5-count version. And that's a huge mistake because one of the ultimate uses of a flow drill, a fixed pattern, is to break the rhythm, right? To break the pattern itself and then use it to develop attributes, right? Use it to work on speed, use it to work on sensitivity, kind of like problem solving in the moment, right? If you get what I mean. So now we've taken a so-called fixed pattern, right? Daniel down in Barbados, that it's amazing, Daniel, that you show up as soon as I start talking about Kali, right? So we could say that the 3-count Sombrada or the 5-count Sombrada in Kali is a fixed pattern, but we inject more aliveness into it by adding the different elements. And that is an essential aspect, people, of what Jeet Kune Do does, what Jeet Kune Do is about, right? It's hard to get that back and forth exchange in kickboxing because there is no what we call bridge contact, right? In Wing Chun, when we do Chi Sao, right, or trap in hands or what have you, there is that literal bridge contact. In the Hubud, there's bridge contact. Even in the stick work, right? Because when you hit me and I block, right? I block and I check. We have bridge contact because our weapons are in contact with each other. So it's difficult to achieve that bridge contact in kickboxing. So what do? You take, again, from the Filipino boxing, and you do what we call the jab drill, or some people call it the jab catch drill, or some people call it the jab exchange. Oh, okay. Hey, Fernando, what's happening? You're right. Jeet Kune Do is life. Thank you very much, son. That's a good shout out right there. So, see, Carlos, this is why I as much as I love to acknowledge people when they come on. You know, my brain goes off on a tangent too quickly, right? So we'll get back to the jab drill, right? So jab drill. I jab, my partner catches, re-jabs at me, I catch, and I finish, right? So it's a 3 count back and forth deal. You inject that into your drilling. You put that as the prefix, right? You attach that at the beginning of the drill, and now what you have done is to turn the glove drill, or even you can do this with the focus mitts. You've turned it into somewhat of a counter for counter drill, and you've established bridge contact. So that's where your creativity in developing these drills comes in. On a related point, see, because again, remember what we're talking about here is man, the living creature, the creating individual, right, being more important than any established style or system. On a related point, that jab drill doesn't have to be limited to just upper body weapons, because you can do it on lower body weapons also. So that the exchange drill can be done with kicking. Now I'll tell you here, and here's what you get. See, so this is where the science aspect, right? Hello, Greg. Greg is checking in from York, Pennsylvania. Oh man, one of these days, Greg, I'll tell you a story about my almost driving into York, Pennsylvania. While I was driving in Maryland, right? Okay. If you take the jab drill and turn it into a kick drill, what you will get is, now this is the science of Jeet Kune, because now we're using a Filipino boxing drill. But if we want, the actual kickboxing techniques that we are using can be Junfan kickboxing techniques, and it will give us the same kind of endurance workout that we can get from doing Thai boxing drills. See, because a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, one of the reasons why Muay Thai was brought into the Jeet Kune blend was because of what it did for endurance, right? But if you are a creating individual, you can find ways to maintain your, let's call it, for lack of a different expression, right? Let's call it your Junfan integrity, your Junfan technique integrity, right? So what you do is you use elements from other martial art methods that can bring the level of your condition, of your endurance training, right, that you could get from Muay Thai, and you bring that into what you're doing, and you don't necessarily have to be doing Muay Thai techniques, right, if you have a problem with that, right? So this is an example of using No Way as Way, and since we can incorporate any of the 4 ranges of combat, or any of the 4 skills of empty-handed combat, right, as either attacking technique or counter-attacking technique, right? So try to understand this. So let's say we're using the jab drill as prefix, right? And on one end, one guy is just going to continue punching. But the guy on the other end, right, as his counter-attacking, he can engage in punching also, but he can engage in kicking and punching. He could engage in kicking by itself. He could also engage in trapping to something, or he could engage in grappling, right? So we have the idea of using No Way as Way, but now we also have the idea of no limitation as limitation, right? Because we can go wherever it is that we want to go with this drill structure. So I'll give you one last word on this. So I told you before that the training guideline is learn the technique, put it into the flow, add the counter, add the recounter, right? So in my own modification or adapting of that training guideline, the approach that we use here in Miami is learn the technique, practice the technique, add the counter, add the recounter. See, because we haven't yet put it into the flow. So we want to get the technique. So let's say right? Okay, so somebody's lead hooking at your head and the technique is to cover and hook back. You can practice that by itself, right? Just as what we might call a dry run. But then you learn the technique, you practice the technique, you add the counter, you add the recounter. Then you put it into the basic flow. So now it's jab exchange, and then somebody, instead of jabbing, throws the hook or goes jab hook in a combination, and then the other person reacts. So it's not a straight ahead dry run. There's an exchange before, and that changes the energy of the drill completely. Then you put the technique, so we put the technique into the basic flow. Add the counter, add the recounter. But then you put the technique into the advanced flow. So since we're talking about upper body weapons, the jab drill could be an example of a basic flow, as opposed to the Song Chi Sao, right, or the Hubud being an example of an advanced flow. Not necessarily that the movements are so, advanced that it takes forever to learn them or whatever. No, it's the amount of things that you can do with them now. So imagine in the middle of Chi Sao or in the middle of Hubud, somebody breaking into jab hook and the other person having to respond to that, and then you got to get back into the flow, right? So it's put it into the basic flow, add the counter, add the recounter, then put it into the advanced flow, add the counter, add the recounter, right? Now, that was a whole lot of technical stuff, and it might be difficult for some of you to visualize what I'm talking about today. And so that's why, two things. I urge you to send me your questions always, but also I urge you to take a look at ilovejeetkundo.com at the quick skills series that we have available, because this is where we go into this exact type of stuff. In detail, right? And it's all progressive. And so earlier this week, I heard from Freddie Harrison, who got Volume 1, and according to him, it's worth every penny. All right, so check it out at ilovejeetkundo.com, and you guys can try it out and see what it is that you think. All right, so I'll tell you a Jeet Kune Do thing that I like. The Jeet Kune Do thing that I hate, I might not be able to pull it up. So I'll talk about it next week in more detail. The Jeet Kune Do thing that I like is anybody who has listened to me talk about Jeet Kune Do for more than 5 minutes will know that my Jeet Kune Do senior, Chris Kent, is somebody that I hold in the highest regard. And Chris commented on something that I posted on the Facebook a while ago, and he gave it his stamp of approval. He said that he liked the fact that I covered that it was both a science and a philosophy that can be taught. And then he said also that he appreciated that I indicated that Junfan kickboxing and Junfan kung fu are precursors to Jeet Kune Do, and in his opinion, it would help if a lot of people understood that simple fact. Right? So that's about it for this week. Right? I want to thank everybody who was live with me and everybody who will catch us on the replay. You guys have a great rest of your day. Keep sending those questions in, suggesting topics and what have you. Right? Enjoy the day. I'll see you next week. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, signing off.